That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Alan v. Farrow, a new 4-part miniseries which will be available on HBO and HBO Max February 21st, 2020, directed by Kirby Dick, Amy Ziering, and Amy Hurdy, Mr. Dick.
Kirby Dick. That's what I thought it was.
Kirby Dick.
Kirby.
We recently reviewed Dick and Ziering's documentary, On the Record, which came out earlier this year.
Oh, they did that?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Kirby Dick's, Ziering used to work as his producer and has now, this is the second project that she's co-directed with him, but he's directed quite a few documentaries, including This Film Is Not Yet Rated, The Invisible War, The Hunting Ground, twice Oscar nominated, always provocative bit of investigative journalism to look forward to.
4 parts. Each part is an hour plus, give or take. It's illuminating, as you said.
Yeah, it's not, these kind of exposés, it's hard to say that you like them.
Sure.
Wherever you fall on the spectrum of who you believe or choose not to believe, it's not a comfortable viewing experience.
My concern prior to watching it was that it might end up feeling like Leaving Neverland.
Yes, which is I thought was a egregiously subjective documentary.
Correct.
That I had a lot of problems with. This is a little the water's a lot more muddy.
Yes. So the main talking heads are Mia Farrow and her daughter Dylan
Farrow and Ronan Farrow.
Woody Allen's not featured in the documentary giving his or defending himself. However, from his 2020 book,
Apropos of Nothing,
the audio of him reading the book is used heavily.
Yes, very.
So that was an interesting way to include his sort of take on
his voice. And also examining, the countless themes of May-December romances with men and women throughout his filmography, focusing, I think, specifically on Manhattan mostly, but.
So the crux of the story that I think is being told is that Dylan, it revolves around the case or the criminal charges that were brought or attempted to be brought against Woody Allen for molesting his then 5-year-old daughter, or 7?
She was 7 in 1992.
His 7-year-old daughter, Dylan.
Concurrent cases in New York and Connecticut.
And the film, or the documentary, sort of explains how the media and the PR machine behind him was able to sort of cloud people's opinion of him, which allowed him to sort of move on from that and still be this prolific filmmaker. And the main sort of tactic that was used was Woody Allen's relationship to his now wife, Soon-Yi Previn, who is the adopted daughter of his ex-girlfriend, Mia Farrow.
Correct.
So it's very interesting. I remember this as a teenager and, the scandal that it produced and the opinions all the adults around me had. So it was interesting to revisit it and see just how sort of complicated this issue is. Obviously, we all know that Woody Allen is out here making movies and didn't spend any time in jail, so he was not ever convicted or even charged. He never went to trial for anything.
Correct.
Except a custody battle as sort of a response, Mia Farrow claims, to the allegations she brought against him.
Right.
So she also claims she didn't intend to report him to the police, which I find kind of problematic, that her intention wasn't to tell the police. She took her daughter to the doctor, and the doctor, as a mandatory reporter, told the police, and that's how this whole thing snowballed. And then he retaliated on her by attempting to get custody of the 2, because Mia Farrow has 11 kids, 2 of whom Woody Allen adopted. So he sued her for custody of those children. He did not win.
Correct.
I have a lot of notes, but maybe do we just want to break down kind of what each episode is about?
It's up to you. You know, we watched all four back to back, and it had the effect on me of being very numbing. I think watching it all together. I am a fan of Woody Allen's output for the most part, and I don't really believe in cancel culture per se, but I left this feeling, you know, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Conflicted, yeah. In ways that I really hadn't been before, because, you know, when we talk about predators like, you know, Weinstein, for instance, and using his power over women, or even Russell Simmons and on the record, and Bill Cosby, etc. You know, and a countless number of people. You know, this was, in my mind, always this particularly dysfunctional family issue, which I never. You know, it didn't ever seem like it was really my business to have any kind of thought about it. Yeah. So.
Episode 1 introduces the issue at hand, which is the sexual abuse allegations against Woody Allen. Then we get a number of female writers and critics talking about Woody Allen's career favorably.
For the most part.
For the most part. We then have Mia Farrow talking about what he did. So it kind of revolves around her witnessing him. So all of the children are introduced, and like how she ended up having children with her husband Andre Previn, and then choosing to adopt a number of other children, then meeting Woody Allen, dating him, then asking if he wanted to have kids, all that.
And her background, being married to Frank Sinatra and the media blitz of that divorce, also suffering from polio, and how that affected her as a young girl.
Which we'll get into, because initially I thought, we're getting a lot of, especially episode 2, we get a lot of background on her career and things, which I thought was like unnecessary, but in the end it did make sense to me. Then we get into like specific things that she saw Woody Allen doing to Dylan, like sort of being very close with her. We get friends and neighbors, babysitters talking about how they saw him laying with her in his underwear in a very intimate way, his head in her lap, seeing Dylan, the young daughter, sucking on Woody's thumb. Then the film critics and the writers go on about his film career, and like you said, they highlight the film Manhattan, which is about Woody Allen playing a character who's 42 years old in a romantic relationship with 17-year-old played by
Mariel Hemingway, which is based partially on supposedly on a actual relationship he
did have, and they do have that alleged young woman at the time in this documentary talking about their relationship. Then a film historian or critic, a male, some guy is talking about Woody Allen has like a library at some point of all of his like scripts that never went anywhere, because he's made like 51 movies. But he has so many more scripts that just never got off the ground. So they have this man talking about how the one commonality in all of Woody Allen's writing is an older man with a significantly younger woman.
Yes.
So it builds a strong case for like this guy being, you know, like...
very fascinated with a certain subject and theme.
Episode 2...
going back to episode 1, they show Mia Farrow with this dollhouse she had constructed for Dylan Farrow.
That you thought was like hereditary.
My only note on that was like, this is very hereditary.
So it's actually episode 2 where we get the whole Manhattan thing and all of his scripts being about older men and younger women. We also get Carly Simon in there talking about, because she lived in the same apartment building as I think Mia Farrow did, because Mia had a home in Connecticut, and Woody had his apartment in New York.
Their relationship, so I find the nuclear family kind of a dysfunctional unit by default anyway, but they had a very, to say the least, interesting relationship, because they were together for 12 years, made 13 films together, never lived together. She lived in Connecticut and he lived in New York. He never wanted to live with them, never wanted children. So there are all kinds of, to them, that arrangement probably, obviously seemed normal to them, but listening to it seems...
I'm just going through highlights of these. Oh, in episode 1, getting back to episode 1, this is when we find out that Mia found X-rated photos of Soon Yi at Woody Allen's apartment. And that's how she learned that they were having
An affair.
But then now getting back to their non-traditional relationship, we hear audio footage of taped phone calls between Woody and Mia. And there was one line that really stuck out to me because she tells him, like, you don't get to have sex with my children. That's part of the deal. And I just think, like, they had such a non-traditional relationship on top of having such extraordinary lives. Like, they're both very famous at the time. He's very powerful. They don't live together, like you said.
She doesn't have an agent anymore at this point because she has only been working with him.
Sure. So I think Mia Farrow talks a lot in the documentary, and she seems very fragile, and I'm familiar with her work, but I'm not familiar with, like, her interviewing, back in the day. So I don't know how she is as a person generally to the public, but she seemed very fragile, and I think there's some guilt. She says she has guilt over this, but it also seems like, because at first you would think, like, how did this woman not know that her boyfriend was doing these things? But it's also like, this bitch had 2011 kids and like is a celebrity who's going back and forth from Connecticut to New York, and the documentary does do a good job of sort of explaining their dynamic. So I find it very interesting that their idea of normal is so far from what the average American person would think.
Right.
And I think that's why it legitimately turned into something, because there was allegations of abuse against a child, so we should take it seriously. But it just is like, their world is so different, which makes me automatically think of Michael Jackson and the world he lived in.
And how things can be misconstrued and misinterpreted, that a lot of things, you might want to take with a grain of salt. But the wordplay between them is interesting.
Yes.
Because even as she's describing her relationship, they were introduced by Michael Caine, a mutual friend, and she talks about how she slowly fell in love with him and how he gradually warmed up to the children. And of course, when he gives his press conference in 1992 and makes all these assertions about how Soon Yi's an adult, of course, it's a very dysfunctional game they're both playing, and I was very uncomfortable learning that they both, because we're getting taped phone conversations, and it's eventually explained that they were both taping each other.
Both taping.
And just, this went on for quite a long time, and the kind of headspace you have to be in to do that.
I think for me, the most damning sort of evidence the documentary provides is we see a lot of home video footage Mia Farrow shot at her home in Connecticut. And when she is told, because the incident when Dylan was abused occurred like one day at the lake house in Connecticut. She was there with like other friends and their children, and the adults left to go do something and the babysitters were there supervising when Woody Allen showed up for like a scheduled visit. And two of the babysitters were like, we couldn't find Dylan.
And they were told not to leave
her alone with Woody, and they're like, for 20 minutes we couldn't find him.
And that's where this whole
the accusation of the main abuse came from.
In the attic, yeah.
In the attic. So Mia is recording Dylan at 7 years old, asking her about the allegations. And I thought that was the most powerful piece of evidence for me to make me think like, this man abused this child. Because she's pretty consistent. And then we have psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers talking about like how to tell if a child's been coached or not. And unanimously everyone agreed that what they saw demonstrates a child who is speaking from experience. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
Well, that and, what allowed Woody Allen to get over this was that the evaluation done from the Yale Medical establishment, where a doctor and two different social workers interviewed her 13 times and deduced that she was fabricating this, that she was most likely being coached, but then all the notes were destroyed.
So that's episode 3. So episode 3 does a deep dive into the investigation, into the abuse allegations, and it's occurring in two areas because Woody Allen is a resident of New York, so there's an investigation occurring in New York, but the abuse is alleged to have occurred in Connecticut. So there are two departments working on it. And what kind of assisted in the downfall, or for this case falling apart, was this sex abuse clinic, like the Yale sex abuse clinic, which you just mentioned, doing this supposed exhaustive interview process with Dylan and finding that she was being deceptive. But then an independent analysis showed that like the way that was handled couldn't have been worse.
And there are a lot of suspicious things surrounding that.
Yes, which I think is very interesting.
Such as that they could have been bought off. And I think what everything, it's like everything that's presented, because of course then there was Moses Farrow that's come out since saying that Mia did coach them, who was not on hand to be interviewed. But Ronan Farrow talks about how he had been approached by Woody Allen for he'd be granted certain favors if he turned against his mother and sister. So leading us to believe that could be why Moses has said what he said. So it's a whole lot of troubling circumstantial evidence that, no matter where you think you feel about it, it's.
So criminal charges are brought against Woody Allen, but we get an interview from the Connecticut prosecutor who said that ultimately he chose, even though he felt there was a solid case and he did believe Woody Allen abused this child, he didn't move forward with it because he thought the trauma of the child who would have to stand trial would be too much. So he chose not to move forward. But episode 3 really does do a deep dive into how Woody Allen's PR machine basically used his relationship with Soon Yi to distract everyone from what was happening.
And smeared Mia Farrow to look like
an unfit mother.
An unfit mother and a hysterical woman.
We also get, this is when Ronan Farrow really pops in episode 3 and talks about how PR works, and which I found very interesting. It's not new information, but it's very interesting and sad how people in power, particularly men, are able to evade legitimate charges oftentimes because they have the ability to mold the story in their favor.
Right, and it's kind of a perfect storm because it really comes down to this young child being able to testify under great scrutiny, and them not going forward with that. To me that suggests that really the laws about the statute of limitations need to change, especially as it comes to childhood trauma, because if we have to, so he just automatically, if this all transpired, he will never be forced to atone for it because charges can never be brought against him now.
In episode 3, we also get information of a New York caseworker whose name, I think...
Paul Williams,
who was known... He was like caseworker of the year. He investigated this misconduct and found that what Dylan said was legitimate, and then he ultimately got fired for being insubordinate, and then he filed a lawsuit, got his job back. That whole thing was very interesting.
Yeah, when Gloria Steinem
advocated for him. We also learn about a clinical term that's often used now that called parental alienation syndrome, which is often used by defense attorneys and to protect men. So what usually happens is if a woman alleges abuse against the man, then they use this parental alienation syndrome sort of situation to say that the woman is just retaliating against the man. So oftentimes the woman loses custody for alleging abuse. And they talk about the history of that dating back, long time ago. So I thought that was very, very
well. That was really that because that was such an integral part of this case that it's been used repetitively since then.
Yeah, and then the final episode, we find out that the obviously the trial never went through, and Woody Allen got to move on. So we get a lot of footage of actors praising Woody Allen, which I found interesting.
Well, that frankly irritated me. I mean, it's really no business of theirs, and these people know one side of him, and so if the purpose of this documentary is to illuminate all of these strange things that have been brushed under the rug. Like Diane Weiss, like you're really gonna, and Kate Blanchett, of course, he's a respected person in the community. And
well, here, I think for me, it's like, obviously I feel bad for Dylan.
Yes,
because she's featured heavily talking about her experience and how this has affected her. She seems fragile. She talks about having high anxiety and not being able to have relationships with men. She is currently in one. She has a child. Mm-hmm. But at the end of this documentary, I felt bad for her because she, her goal was to. She's so tired of hearing Woody Allen's name being spoken in reverie, when to her all he is this monster. And so for her, so the final sort of clips of the documentary are sort of the backlash that has occurred in recent time related to Woody Allen. And she kind of says, like, it almost is presented like these people are doing it for her, but I feel bad because, like, these celebrities who are denouncing and, like, all these cast members who are donating their money to charity, they're not doing it for her. They're doing it for PR. So it's like, it's a noble thing, but it's complicated. Like, this person was not convicted of a crime. And yes, Woody Allen seems like a creep. Everything about his writing, his marriage seems really off, but it's not illegal. And I think when I was a kid in the 90s and hearing about Sun Yi, the rhetoric was like, he married his daughter. Mm-hmm. That's not that man's daughter. That's his ex-girlfriend's adopted daughter. So it's like, there's some bitch on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City married to, like, her step-granddaddy. And, I mean, it's like, yes, it does seem weird, but we just don't know. At the end of the day, we don't know. And he wasn't charged with anything. So it's complicated to expect these people who have worked with him to denounce him. Right. Which is kind of how I feel about Sherry Pie, the RuPaul's Drag Race.
Right. Well, in cancel culture at large, I think, and in one of the episodes they bring up the age-old argument of the artist versus their art, and if you can really differentiate between the two. And I think that really comes down to your own personal convictions and your own personal beliefs, and like anything else. And this is very troubling. Like I said, like, Woody Allen's directed a lot of masterpieces and some not so great films. So it's, initially it's like you don't want to believe that he would be molesting a 7-year-old girl, but you have to listen to the victim as well and weigh that as you will. But it also bothered me seeing Mia Farrow, and because I am a great fan of her work with and without Woody Allen, and I think where I was moved to tears watching this was a few of her longer passages speaking about the experiences, particularly during that very bitter divorce. And what's most disappointing to me is, besides the fact that what's most disappointing to me is seeing that he was so vindictive to her, and that he kind of just removed himself from the situation. He said he loved these kids, and had fought.
Well, he seems vindictive if he did abuse this girl. But if he didn't, and Mia Farrow just did this to him because she was mad that he married her adopted daughter, then that's why it's complicated, because we don't know. It does seem like he's vindictive, but if he didn't molest that girl, then...
But at the same time, he still has said in interviews since then that, the last time he saw her was hugging her goodbye when she was 7, and that he still loves her. But what have you done to...
What is he supposed to do? This girl is accusing him of molesting her, and if he didn't do it, like, I wouldn't want to see her either.
Sure, but I don't know.
My final thought is, it's so weird to watch, like, these very personal things. First of all, this is why we have, like, a justice system and a court of law, and you have defense attorneys, prosecutors, a judge, a jury. Evidence is presented in a very specific way. So it's so weird, like, the court of public opinion, and you got these two assholes here talking about this story, and it's like, we don't know.
That's true. We don't
know. I don't know these people, and I don't favor one or the other. I could give a damn about Woody Allen or Mia Farrow, so I'm not trying to, like, sort of, like, make a case for him that he didn't do this. It's just like, we don't know. These are people's very personal lives, and they put it out there on display.
Right.
And then Mia Farrow and her daughter are choosing to speak out, and they explain why, and it makes sense to me. It's just so unfortunate. Like, at the end of the day, if someone was abused, that trauma is... I mean, that's so much more deep and complex than like a documentary and trying
Right.
to tell a story and ratings and.
Right, and again, at the end of the day, you're only getting that this is a very subjective piece of investigative journalism as well.
But it was a great watch. We
Yeah.
watched it straight through with two other people and had like great conversation throughout. So for that, I would say I would give this 3.5 out of 5 stars.
I think that's fair.
Anything else?
No.
Bye.
Bye.